Hello everyone. Today we're in the studio and I'm going to show you how you can take pictures which show water art or the structure of a splash of water. This may sound quite simple to do, but it is quite technically involved. So bear with me as I go through all the various technical aspects which are connected with this. For this sort of thing, you're going to need somewhere to do it. You can actually do this outside. You don't have to be in a studio. Being in a studio means that you don't have to rely on the weather. For instance, it's raining quite a lot outside at the moment. So we'll carry on. I have on the floor here an old pond liner, small pond liner. This is just to catch all the water that we're going to throw around. This sort of thing can get very messy very quickly, so it's a good idea to have something on the floor to catch the water that you end up throwing around. Besides that, you're going to need your camera, of course. I'm using the same one that I usually use, tethered into this machine so that you can see the results as they come through. I've got a fairly standard sort of lens on here again, 24-70. Again, I would recommend using a fairly long lens so that you can keep the camera away from the water and the splashes and so on. Otherwise, you'll be continuously cleaning the front element, or forgetting and having all sorts of spots which you'll have to retouch out later. Besides that, you will need some form of a light source. So I'll just go and get one. I'm going to be using this sort of unit. This is a Profoto D2, relatively powerful monoblock flash. Monoblock meaning it has everything in the one unit. All the capacitors are in here, all the circuitry. It has a modeling light. It also has a flash. And it has the ability to reduce the energy output, which is quite important. So besides this, I'm also going to show you how you can achieve similar, not exactly the same, but similar results by using a relatively normal speed light or flash gun. But more on that a little later. One of the tricks, if you like, to capturing this type of liquid art is that you need a very short flash duration. The shorter the better. We're going to aim today to get a flash duration of around about 1/10,000th of a second, which can be achieved with this unit and also with the flash gun. So I'm going to place this where we're going to use it, and I'll plug it in and we'll do a few tests. So what might seem like a strange place to put it is facing the camera, but I'll explain that in a moment. So we have our flash source. I'll just plug that in. This is a mains powered one, and obviously if you're playing with water you do have to be careful about the mains as well. It would be very unfortunate if you electrocuted yourselves. So we'll just turn that on. Okay. So as I said before, this has a modeling light. So if I turn the modeling light on, you should be able to see that come on the front here. I'll turn that off for the moment because it's a little dazzling. Right. So here we have our light source. There we have our camera. I'm going to start up the capture software. As usual, I'm using Capture One. So if we just do that, come around here, I'll turn the camera on. go. So the software has recognized the camera, and you can see over here that it's come up with the name of the camera. We've got the shutter speed, which I've set to the sync speed for this camera, which is 1/250th of a second. That doesn't actually make any difference to the flash duration at all, but it does make a difference to how much of the ambient light in the room. Obviously we're in the studio here, so it is fairly well lit, or if you're outside, for instance, the higher this number, the more of the ambient light you will cut out, together with your f-stop, which at the moment, by the look of things, this is set to f16. I'll probably leave it on that because you want to achieve quite a big depth of field. You don't really know where the water splashes are going to end up. So it's a good idea to have as much depth of field as you can get. I've left the ISO on its lowest setting, which is 100. One of the compromises that you may have to make when you're using a smaller powered flash like one of these will be to wind up the ISO to compensate for the lack of power out of the flash gun. But I'll come back to that a little later. Okay, so we'll just check that all this is working. Yep, that's fine. Obviously no flash because I haven't got any trigger on here yet. I'm going to use one of these radio slaves or radio triggers. This will give me the opportunity to control the flash remotely from the top of the camera. So I'll just pop this on the camera. There we go. So if I press the test button, that fires the flash. Now at the moment, this won't give us much in the way of a picture at all, apart from a very bright spot in the middle of the picture. So what we need to do is put some form of hood on here, just to concentrate the light a little. So I'll place this on here like this. There we go. This is the equivalent of zooming in your flash gun, if you like. What I'm aiming for is to concentrate the light into a ball. And I'm going to project that ball onto some diffusion paper or diffusion sheet. I've used this many times before. It's the same sort of stuff. It's the plastic diffusion sheet. You can use normal fabric for this, but for this type of work where you're actually seeing the sheet or the fabric in the picture, you do have to be careful to make sure that you end up with something which is fairly homogeneous, always the same. So I'm just going to pop it on this stand. There we go. Pop that on there. Okay. Something like that. I haven't lined any of this lot up yet, so bear with me while I just have a little look through the camera to see if any of this is vaguely in the right place. So that just needs to go across a little more. And needs to be straightened out. And just needs to go up a bit. I'm trying to make this the shooting area. So approximately halfway across the pond liner here will be the shooting area. So this will form the background that will appear in the picture. So we'll just check that. I haven't set any of the flash power or the focus or anything yet, so we'll just give it a bit of a test and see what comes through. This is the sort of thing that we're getting. So we have a relatively high hotspot in the middle here. It's not quite in the middle, so it needs a bit of adjustment. But it graduates off to the edges. I think you can see that we've got a gradual fall off. And that is what we want. I'll show you the effect that has on the water which is in front of it in a moment. But we'll just carry on setting this up. So I'll just move the flash ever so slightly. There we go. I have a distance behind the flash, behind the diffusion material of about a meter between the flash and the diffusion material. And that is, again, one of the things which is defining how this will fall off to the edges. So let's just fire that again. There we go, that's more in the middle. Perhaps a little more. Let's pull that there. The other thing that you need to do, and I'm just going to check on here which mode it's in. Yes, this is actually in the freeze mode, as they call it on these flash units. You can alter the flash duration on the unit to make it a bit quicker, which is what I've just done. There we go. So that's more in the center. And just by chance, that exposure to me as a starting point doesn't look too bad. However, just to show you the effects that you get with this sort of thing, I'm actually going to wind the energy up. So we're going to place this into flash group A. Like that. I'm just going to take that up by a couple of stops. There we go. I'll fire that again. And you see that our ball there has got considerably bigger. Okay. Let me just have a look at the back here. Yes, that's on about energy level 5. So the next thing that you might want to do is if you have the ability to have some form of cable release on your camera, it's a good idea to use one of those for this sort of thing, because it gives you, again, it's all about control really, and this gives you a bit more control over where you can stand to fire the camera. So again, it's just a short cable release, but it's very handy to use for this type of work. Right, time for the messy bits. I have on here a bucket with some water in it, and also various different types of containers which we can use for throwing the water. So just to give you an idea of what it may look like, and I do say may because this is a very random event. That's part of the appeal of doing it really, is that it is extremely random. But just to give you a starting point, I'm just going to pour some water out of here and fire the flash at the same time. So this time I'm not throwing it, I'm just pouring it. There we go. And hopefully on the screen you should be able to see that we've captured some drops there. Okay, so if I just zoom into these, And here you can see individual drops of water, and they've all been frozen in time. But what you should also be able to see, actually I think you can see it quite well on that one. If I just zoom into that one a little more. So you should be able to see in here we have a lensing effect, and you can actually see parts of the room in the drop of water. And that is quite important for these type of pictures. If we made the whole of this this background perfectly uniform, and you had lots of white material around, or you're doing this in a relatively small room which has white walls and white ceilings and so on, you would end up with no definition to the drops of water as they come along. You can only see these because they lens the background and the ambient area which is around them. Therefore, what you need to do is create some contrast. So if I turn the flash power down again, the flash energy rather, shouldn't call it power, it's the wrong term. So I'll just take 2 stops off that like we did before. So I'll just go and fire that as a test. There we go. Now you should be able to see that there is quite a lot of darkness around here, and the center is blown out. You can see on the numbers at the top here, this is the value at the point where the little pointer is. I'll just move that to a pointer to make it easier for you to see. So by the time I get to the middle, we've got 255, 255 and 255 in every channel, which means that is completely blown out. And by the time we get to about here, it's starting to degrade off to single figures at the very sides here. Okay, so if I now do another test with some water dropping like we did before, you should be able to see the difference it makes to the stream of water. So I'll just pour this out because it makes it easier than trying to synchronize everything. There we go. Right, so now you should be able to see, if I make this a bit bigger, yes, we have much more definition. Can you see all the dark lines around the outside of the drop here? This is because the water is lensing the background and showing what is happening in the ambient area. So again, at the bottom here, you can see these have some nice definition on them. As far as the setup is concerned, that's about all there is to it. You have a flash gun, you have some diffusion material, you have something to catch the water in, and some water, and a camera, and off you go. Just to recap on all the settings that I'm using, the camera's set to its flash sync speed, which is 250th of a second. I've set the aperture to f16 to give me a reasonable depth of field. I would guess the depth of field is possibly about this big across the tank. I've set the flash to give me a correct exposure around about a third of the way across. You might also notice on this monitor that the color temperature here is slightly cool. That is one of the drawbacks, if you like, of using a fast flash duration. Okay, so we have our flash set, everything else is ready. Time to get a bit messy, I think. So I will just, first of all, just do a test, just to make sure everything is fine. So with no water, just fire one off. There we go. And now I will fill my bucket. Might bring this lot a little bit closer so it's a bit easier to reach both things at the same time. And this is literally trial and error. I have tried doing this with various different types of flash triggers, laser triggers, etc. And because the water doesn't necessarily end up going in the same place twice, it is very difficult to use with a flash trigger. So basically you just have to have a few goes. You might get a good result first time. You might get a good result on the 90th time. It is purely random. But you'll see how I go, and we'll see how long it takes to get a reasonable result. So here goes. So throw the water, fire the flash. And we missed that one, as you can see at the bottom. So we'll have a few more goes. There we go, got something there. It's a starting point. So I'm just going to stop at that point just for 1 second, and we'll just check this image and just make sure everything is nice and sharp, because that's not a bad image at all, actually. Could do to be down a little, but you can see all the structure in the water in here. And we've got some very nice graduations going on the edges. So the beginnings of a reasonable image there, I think. Okay, we'll carry on. And this is basically all there is to it. You just keep going until you get something you like. Okay, here we go again then. So there you go. That's the sort of thing that you can do. So let's have a look at some of those. Okay, so I can look back and see some of the ones that we've captured. Some are better than others. Let's put a star on some of these. This one's quite nice, quite like that. I think so far that one's possibly my favourite. That could have been better. That sort of thing's quite nice. You can get rid of these outliers in Photoshop quite easily, just clone them out. This one shows a bit of structure within the water here, which is quite nice. And that is quite spectacular, I think. Again, I would get rid of some of the outliers in Photoshop, but it gives you an idea. It's a bit of a starting point. So I mentioned before that you don't have to use a huge monoblock flash unit for this. So let's just swap that out. So what I've got is a standard flash gun, and I've just put it on this mount so I can put it on the top of a stand, like that. Let's just turn this on. Okay, So I'm just changing this so that its mode is in full manual mode. And that it's on full power to start with. Oops. That's just about there, I think. I've got it plugged into a slave so that it will fire off the same trigger that I'm using on the top of the camera, hopefully. Right, so we'll just leave that there. So before I put the paper back, I will just test that to see if it works, which it does. Okay, let's swing this back into view. There we go, something like that. So if everything else stays the same, that should be reasonably in the middle. Let's just give that a bit of a try. So I haven't changed any of the settings on the camera here at all. All I've done is change the flash out for a speed light. Okay, and we can see from that the color temperature is a little different, but also that the graduation, the way it graduates off the sides here, is very different. So what I can do is adjust the flash itself. On this particular unit, it has a pseudo zoom head so that you can zoom it in. So I'm going to try and just zoom it in a little bit to start with. But don't forget, it's still on full power. Okay. We'll give that a bit of a go. A little more gradation. I would also say that it's actually a little too intense in the middle. Let's just see if we can turn the power down. So it's saying full power, and now it's saying half power, which is the equivalent of one power step or one energy step on the monoblock. There we go. So we're starting to get the same sort of effect. You should be able to see that you've got a hot spot in the middle and it's graduating off to the corners. Not quite the same shape as the other one, but ostensibly it's exactly the same. So if we have a test water drop, and I'll just, for this, pour some water across it like we did before. So this is at half power, remember, on the flash gun. So somewhere in the middle, there we go, about there. Oops. There we go. We've got some drops there, which should be enough to illustrate what I'm going to talk about next, which is the flash duration. Yes. So if we just zoom in a little on these, I'll pick one that's fairly easy to see at the bottom here, there we go. You should be able to see that there is motion blur on these, especially the smaller ones. You can see the motion blur quite easily on the smaller ones actually. You're getting the nice graduation down the sides, but you're getting motion blur on the drops themselves because the flash duration is too long. So the way to make the flash duration shorter is to turn the power down. So if I turn the power down on the flash gun, it's at half power, remember. I will turn it down to 1/16th power. We'll do another test. Right. So I can compensate for that by increasing the ISO So I'll take that up to 400 and just do another test. Possibly needs to be a bit more. That's another stop. There we go. Okay, so this is 16th power. So again, we'll do another little drip test, if you like. Dribble some water. I don't know whether there's enough there to actually see. Let's try that again. There we go, that's better. There we go. And hopefully there should be less motion blur now. So we'll have a little look a bit closer in. Yes, you can see on here there is very little motion blur. There is still a slight amount, but overall not bad. And again, you're getting reasonable definition. So let's give it a go for real. Okay, we ready? Let's give it a try. In this image, I think you can make out there is a part down here which is actually a reflection of me. I think that's my arm. You can probably see parts of my head in here. This is something that you've got to be fairly careful of when you're doing this sort of thing, especially if you've had to wind the sensitivity up because you haven't got a lot of flash power. One of the things I should have done to start with actually was just check and see how much ambient light we're actually getting in the image. So if I just take the flash trigger off and just take an image, and we can just check that that is as black as we need it to be. It's not far off, but there is some residual pickup. You can see from the numbers at the top here. So it's just something to be aware of, especially if you're doing this outside. One of the disadvantages of using a relatively low-powered flash gun is that when you start turning it down to give you a short flash duration, then you need to increase the sensitivity, and that can lead to you picking up the ambient light. So just make sure that you check for that, otherwise it will spoil your picture. So putting that back on there, let's just carry on and see if we can get this to work. There we go. Let's prime that. And like we did before, it's trial and error. Oops, got that one in the picture. Whoops, nice idea, got the sheet wet. That's another thing that you've just got to be careful of. If you get a bit carried away like I just did, you're going to get the background wet. So on this it's quite easy because all we need to do is roll that piece out of the way and have another go. The background material that I'm using, by the way, is relatively cheap. I think a full roll is something like £10 or £11, and you getting on for 25 meters on a roll. The bit at the bottom will eventually dry out, so you haven't damage the sheet at all. It's just that for the time being you can't use that bit, so you just have to wait for it to dry out. So let's have another go. Oops, flash has gone to sleep. That's the other thing about using flash guns. They do tend to go to sleep if you don't keep using them. Okay, so let's have a look at those. I'll just run through these. Some very nice ones there. Okay, so to recap. We've captured quite a lot of images, some of which are more spectacular than others, but I'll leave the arty side of this to yourselves. I've shown you the mechanics of how you can achieve this sort of image relatively easily. It can be a bit messy, as you can probably see from the floor here and the sheet that I used before. But because you can use a relatively normal flash gun, I'll just go and get it. Here we are. It's just your own ingenuity in order to make it all work. Something like this is relatively inexpensive. You might have one already. One thing I would guard against is if you're using an older style monoblock, they do tend to have very long flash durations, and there's no way to shorten it because there's very little control over the older style ones. So if you were to get some form of monoblock flash heads, I would go for something which has quite a lot of control over it so that you can actually turn it down. The more you turn it down, the shorter the flash duration will be. For this sort of water art, you actually, 1/10,000th of a second might sound a lot, but it isn't. It's about the minimum that you need to do this. Because there is the water itself isn't actually moving very quickly at this point when you're capturing it. If you're actually throwing the water so it's hitting something and then bouncing off, you'll need a much faster flash duration. The droplets move faster after it's hit something. So you do need a very fast flash duration for that. Okay, well, I hope that has been of some use to you all, and I expect to see some images like this in the upcoming merit competitions, especially the one about water. Good night.